Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Adam Frost. I'm the Director of Luxury Hospitality Management at Regent's University London. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. We're having a great session today talking about sustainability in the luxury hospitality industry. I've got some great panelists here with me today, and I'd like to take a moment to allow them to introduce themselves. I'll start with Antje Balow, who's the Assistant to the Managing Director of the Peninsula London. Antje?
Good morning, everybody, and greetings from the Peninsula London. Delighted to be joining you today. I've started working for Peninsula about 2 years ago as part of the pre-opening and opening team overseeing the sustainability efforts here in London. Prior to that, I worked on a development called Admiralty Arch, a Grade 2 listed building in London that's opening as a World of Historian next year. Also, as part of the remit, working on BREEAM and other accreditations. And before that, for a little over 10 years, I worked for Jumeirah Hotels here in London, again, overseeing CRS or CSR, as it was called there, efforts, as well as business excellence. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming. Next, we have Debra Patterson, who's the Director of Quality and Sustainability at the Savoy. Debra?
Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be joining. I am indeed the Director of Quality and Sustainability at the Savoy Hotel, a Forbes 5-star luxury hotel just across from the River Thames in central London on the Strand. I joined 27 years ago. I can hardly believe it. And I started rolling out sustainability initiatives in about 2005. So here we are, 2024. And I'm looking forward to seeing what today brings.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Debra. Next, we have James, the Director of Sustainability and the Client Director and Sustainability Lead at Positive Luxury. James?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, so I lead all things sustainability and clients at Positive Luxury, and we are a leading global consultancy operating just in the luxury and sustainability space, working with the likes of Marriott Luxury Hotels, Harvey Nichols, Tom Ford, Courvoisier, all manner of businesses, helping them on their sustainability journeys. And I have worked in sustainability for about 17 years now, across all facets of the discipline, so environment, social impact, bit of everything really. And it's all in service of helping businesses to kind of drive growth and create value from sustainability.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, James. And finally, we have Matthew Pallone, who's the Director of Purchasing for the Hotel Café Royal. Matthew?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Matt. I'm French, as you can hear. I'm the Director of Purchasing for Hotel Café Royal for the past 6 years. Before that, I was looking after the purchasing and procurement for Sofitel St. James, also in London, not far from Piccadilly Circus. And before that, my background is food and beverage. So there is no sustainability role here at Café Royal, but I'm kind of leading that role here through procurement and purchasing. And we have a sustainability manager on the group side. So I'm liaising with her on anything to do with sustainability. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks so much for coming, and thanks everyone else for joining us today. So we're going to start with some definitions. So first things first, I'd like, James, if you could give us what you'd say the definition of sustainability is to help us define how the conversation will flow today.
Yeah, very happy to. And I think it's one that's evolved over time. I think if you went back 15 or 20 years, it was just another word for energy. Energy management was what people meant by sustainability. And thankfully now it's evolved to be a much, much broader discipline. So I think within hospitality, this is especially important because of the different touch points the industry has. So you've got not just energy and water and waste within a space, but, the biodiversity, the local culture and environment, human rights, governance. It's a really exciting place to be operating in. I think you need to think of not just the hotel or the restaurant, but actually the kind of the ecosystem within which that operates. And when it comes to a definition, I think every business tends to think of it slightly differently and even use slightly different language. So some businesses will use sustainability, others will speak to CSR, to ESG. There's a few different kind of intentions with those definitions, but broadly, and at its simplest, I think sustainability is the steps that a business takes to minimize the negative impacts it has on the environment and society. It's the kind of the steps it takes and actions it takes to drive positive impacts on environment and society. And I think with a focus on both the material issues, so rather than just kind of spurious initiatives, what are the things that are actually going to move the needle for a business? And I think it's really important to acknowledge when it comes to defining sustainability that this is not to the detriment of a business. This is very much something that is seen to drive growth and help make a business successful. So whether that's through innovation, through managing risk, through attracting and retaining the best talent, it's definitely a much more holistic space than it's ever been before. But it really comes down to the work a business is doing to both minimize and amplify its impact on the environment around it, I would say.
That's amazing. Thank you. And that's going to give us a great context for jumping off into the rest of the conversation. So first, what I'd like to ask is, what does sustainability mean in the context of the hospitality industry today? More specifically, why is it critical now more than ever? If I could start with Antje.
Yeah, I think, with the sort of changing definitions that we just heard about, I think that is really interesting because it has sort of broadened over the years. And I think hospitality touches on so many different elements of so many different industries and life in general, really. When you think about the real estate involved, financing, regulations, energy, travel, waste management, supply chains, food and drink. I mean, the list is endless, and they all somehow converge onto our industry in many ways. And we also employ, a lot of people and have a platform, I suppose, also to, especially at the sort of the luxury end of the market, to be sort of seen as leaders and best in class. So I think there is a change of perspective now that actually, is no longer just about maybe, recycling and having a couple of organic dishes on your menus. You need to sort of dig a bit deeper to make sure you're sort of on the right side of this, and you're not seen to be greenwashing in any shape or form, which comes obviously with its own risks.
This isn't our list of questions, but do you have a second to maybe talk about what greenwashing is?
I think the very term greenwashing actually does derive, sadly, from our industry, which is this world famous example of some hotels asking guests about whether they prefer to use their towels for a second day or would like them washed, please, without any kind of reference really as to what the actual impact is. But the sort of notion that you are sort of thinking about this as a hotel and you're giving guests an option is sort of often seen to be as a sort of a nice idea. It's a good thought, but sort of sadly not enough as to what it is. And I think broadly there will be regulation coming into play as well that actually prevents this sort of thing from happening where, guests or customers or clients are given the sort of impression that something super sustainable is happening when in fact it isn't, or there aren't enough numbers, shall we say, to back that up.
That's great. Thank you, Antje. Now that we've talked about this from the perspective of the hospitality industry, I'd like to spin it out a little bit more and talk about the luxury sector in a broader sense. James, do you have any perspective on that as a broader sector? Why is sustainability important to the industry today, and what is the context of how the luxury industry interacts with it?
Yeah, very happy to. And I think, sustainability is an exciting space to play because it's very dynamic and everything's always moving. And I think the biggest thing that I think still businesses grapple with when it comes to sustainability, and this is true of hospitality and other luxury industries, is the say-do gap, which is essentially the sentiment that people will often be willing to tell you they'll pay more for a product or a service if it's sustainable, but that doesn't always, if not very rarely, translates into their actual behavior. And I think this is something that businesses are grappling with, because when it comes down to a business choosing to be sustainable and do the kind of work that avoids greenwashing, so actually having some substance behind it, I think the challenge for luxury business is that there's less explicit demand from the people that they serve. So whether it's consumers or customers, whilst a broader sentiment may be that people are interested in this, from the luxury businesses we work with, that isn't showing up quite so strongly. And it puts businesses in a tricky spot, because if you're trying to justify the business case for investing in sustainability without very explicit demand, you need to have like a very strong sense of conviction internally to kind of still do it. And the other thing I think businesses balance as a result is communication. So to what extent are they proactively communicating sustainability versus reactively doing it when asked? Because often if you've got an audience that isn't itching for this information, if you're a little bit too pushy with it, you can come across sounding a bit inauthentic and then risk that kind of greenwashing if you're sort of banging on about a message that perhaps isn't meeting kind of welcome ears. So that's kind of a bit of context, but I think it's more critical than ever. I mean, we would say at Positive Luxury, the luxury businesses should lead the way. I think across industries, luxury is a brilliant source of innovation and inspiration, and very aspirational by its very nature. And I think those things also are true for sustainability. So I think, there's a really exciting opportunity for luxury businesses. And I think, and Antje kind of touched on this, there's only one direction of travel as well. I think why this is more critical than ever is with every passing year, if not 6 months, the regulatory landscape is shifting, interest from, say, employees or regular consumers is evolving, climate change is happening right before our very eyes. So there's, the reasons get more compelling by the day to do this. And I think the risk that businesses have to manage is if you get left behind, it's quite hard to catch up. So I think businesses have to be on the front foot with this, doing so in a kind of an authentic way.
I just want to jump in, actually. There's another aspect that's very, very interesting with sustainability and hospitality that I've noticed, is that actually we've been driving the change from within. We've been looking at our suppliers, we've been pushing our suppliers for sustainable accreditations, transport, how they're bringing the products into the country or even to the hotel, even in design. Even I can think of an example of a well-known tea bag company that desperately wanted to work with us, but we insisted they made change in their packaging, for instance. So we have, certainly in my experiences, we've had a little bit of the power within the hotel industry to make the changes to insist the changes from the supplier perspective, which has been very exciting. And it's developed, as you say, the creativity and innovation. We've allowed entrepreneurs, small businesses to trial with us and see how things work. And we've always been willing to take on these small projects and work with different businesses who are trying to make the change. So we also have had a big influence on making the change, but in the other direction, actually, aside from meeting guests' expectations.
That's a great point, Debra, and I think that it brings forward a really important thought on the fact that the luxury and the hospitality industries are often leaders in these initiatives. I wanted to hone in on what you're talking about with suppliers and maybe pitch something over to Matthew. How do you use the industry to drive meaningful change through collaboration with your suppliers and through local communities? Is there anything that you're doing that, to Debra's point, is kind of driving that change in that regard?
Yeah, I think a key element that Debra mentioned, it's literally creating a meaningful partnership with your local supplier. There's a big things now which is on every topic, so I'm going to focus on food, for example, which is working with local supplier. All the chefs now that I'm working with are pushing on that element when product should be locally sourced. Your meat, your vegetables, as much as you can. There is still things that grows into the UK or within the country around. Obviously, yes, you will have your avocado on your menu that are coming from the other side of the world, or your pineapple, but there's a lot to do with seasonality and your menu. Same thing for the beverage. I think we've seen a big rise on the English sparkling, which is taking over from very expensive champagne at extremely high quality. You've got some beautiful product here, and I think we've seen that pushing a lot, on the menu. And on different aspects, I think talking about working with like a small local company, may startup. We also have like a nice story here when we a few years ago partnered with a nuts supplier. He was a single individual working from his house, trying to source key ingredients, specifically nuts from around the world, but very high sustainably way, and working with like local farmer, making sure they were getting paid fairly. And we've decided to took that supplier on, and now he's a very successful business, and he's even pushing even further. He has started his own charity and supporting local farmers all around the world on sustainable sourcing and good practice. So there is, we have that power as big hotel with big names, and we can drive the change definitely. But it has to be meaningful, and you have to, work with your supplier a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's a great point. It shows the great power of our industry to kind of help these sustainability initiatives take hold and to grow. Next, I want to move into the future. Let's start looking forward. So I wanted to talk about how businesses can best prepare for future challenges when implementing sustainability initiatives in in new properties versus older ones. So as we move forward, there's a lot of new properties being built. There's a lot of very legacy properties in the marketplace. So I wanted to frame this out to Antje and Debra because they're kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum here. Antje's at the brand new Peninsula and Debra's at the very classic Savoy. So there's going to be a different approach there. Maybe Debra, if you could start.
Yes, thank you. The Savoy is 135 years old. So currently it's really important that we make sure that the property doesn't become a stranded asset with new regulations moving forwards. So yes, we have a whole range of sustainable initiatives across the whole operation, but ultimately that's the most important part. So to try and become a carbon neutral property for building an historic grade 2 listed building seems quite a challenge. But we're at the point now where we're working with BREEAM, actually, and CREAM, and I hope your listeners are aware of those two organisations to secure the green asset value of the Savoy Hotel. And we have a goal, actually. We believe that probably within the next 3 years, we'll be able to declare ourselves carbon neutral. We just have to remove the gas. We're already using 100% renewable energy for electricity. We're doing a retrofit of the boilers to reduce the gas, and then possibly joining with Westminster for a sort of thermal heating program, which is very exciting. And then, yeah, it would be quite special to be able to be a carbon neutral building. So fingers crossed, we're working very hard towards that.
Congratulations. That sounds like a really important coup for the hotel. So that's some great work. Now, given that the Peninsula is a new property, people would probably think that it might be an easier task to secure these sustainability initiatives, but I'm sure that there are its own unique set of challenges. Antje, how do you respond to that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think credit where it's due, Deborah. I think that's seriously wonderful news. And, I think it's sort of in London, there is a number, I think it's about 80 or 85% of real estate or buildings generally will actually fall into the stranded asset category within the next 10 years. So it's a huge amount of the built world around us, really, that is sort of part of the problem at this moment in time. We're obviously very fortunate here to have been able to kind of design with this in mind before the Peninsula was even built. And I think if you have that, you have the opportunity to go through the sort of life cycle assessments of all the sort of materials and fabrics and every single piece of the hotel to really just take that under the sort of magnifying glass and see, is this energy intense or is this actually okay? Has this come, does this wood come from some sort of endangered place, or can we use this? What, you need to really, for BREEAM accreditation, I'm sure Debra knows all about this too, you really need to jump through many, many hoops and provide all the details technically and otherwise for a building to sort of obtain that accreditation. For us here, at this moment in time, we also get our electricity from renewable sources, et cetera, et cetera. So we are at this moment in time as a snapshot in a really good place. But even for us, when we do this calculation on this CREM tool that Debra also referenced in terms of, how well is your building doing to actually hit this net zero target by at the latest 2050, we know that by 2035, we will be falling behind the curve unless we start actually, constantly retrofit our building in some shape or form, and whether that's thermal heating or whatever else. But there is I think that's an issue across the board. Even if you are a new building now, you really need a plan and people with a vision and understanding of what the sort of the risk elements here are, because at some point getting insurance for your building will become harder, obtaining finance will become harder, etc., etc. It's really not just a sort of a nice to have element anymore. It is, it will become regulatory, and you will have to kind of put your money where your mouth is, as they say.
That's great. Thank you so much for providing that perspective, kind of from the building angle. Now I want to talk about the opportunities and the problems that the industry will be facing from a resource scarcity and an evolving consumer behavior perspective. So maybe if I could toss that over to Matt to talk about resource scarcity and how consumer needs are changing.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of the consumer side of on our hand, talking about a bit the supply chain, it's a lot to do with being agile, I think, as a business, and be able to adapt very quickly, embrace technology. There's a lot of ways of doing this. Yeah, I think being agile is probably the first one. Making sure that you train your team on changes. I would say so.
That's great. James, do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, very happy to kind of jump in. And I think as we've kind of touched on, this is sustainability in the context of hospitality is such a broad topic, which is exciting, but also creates lots of different things for businesses to have to kind of manage, to anticipate, and to obviously navigate as and when they show up. And I think what we would say, broadly speaking, is actually there's a pretty positive picture to paint when it comes to some of the trends, particularly around the interest in customers and consumers. As I mentioned, there is this kind of say-do gap between what people are willing to tell you they'll do, what they'll actually do. But there's lots of research out there from kind of the big four consultancy firms like Deloitte, EY, the likes of those, that would tell you that actually thinking of it in the context of sustainable tourism, actually that sector is thriving and projected to do pretty well for the next sort of 10 years or so, obviously coming off of a very tough time post-COVID. And there's stats around the degree to which kind of particularly affluent travellers and particularly younger affluent travellers are expected to drive the growth in sustainable tourism. So what that kind of projects is a picture where there's a growing base of kind of consumers, customers, patrons that are interested in and kind of demanding this stuff, whether they're prepared to pay premium to reduce their impact or kind of take advantage of a particularly positive one. Obviously goes a little bit case by case. And earlier this year, we did a project with a MasterCard, which is a research project on the future trends around sustainable tourism. And it touched on both kind of hospitality in the context of accommodation, food and beverage, experience. It's a kind of very broad ranging piece of work. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting one because it paints a very rosy picture, because there's demand for more sustainable experiences, when people are dining out, when they're looking for accommodation, which is great. But obviously when it comes to certain locations, the more demand for ecotourism, the more strain you're putting on those environments. I think it's one of those things that you have to be really mindful of when it comes to hospitality, is within kind of urban environments, there are one set of impacts, but more further afield, there are a whole host of other kind of more nature-specific impacts that businesses are having to navigate, either because they're in some luxury resort on an island somewhere, or because of their supply chain. And just to kind of round off, I think when it comes to the actual things businesses are doing from an operational side, I think these have been touched on, but it is about kind of minimizing impacts around energy, water, waste, looking into renewable energy, like net zero, kind of grey water recycling, and seasonality of menu. I think those things are really kind of areas. There's lots of going on, as evidenced by the people on this call. There's so much good stuff happening. I think when you look slightly further afield and businesses are looking into kind of conservation, who they're partnering with, kind of charities, philanthropy, how they're supporting kind of local economies through their supply chain, that's, I think, where things get a little bit more like challenging and exciting. I guess that's kind of some of the broader challenges that businesses are navigating, because ultimately, if you're in the sustainable tourism kind of market, you need destinations that are still going to be around in sort of 10, 20 years time.
That's a great point. And you really kind of bring forward something with the great successes of the things that people are doing on this call. It seems like there's a lot of great initiatives. I want to kind of lead that into the next question. All of these great things that you guys are all doing, how do you communicate those to your key stakeholders? How do you get that information across, both your goals and the things that you've succeeded at? Debra, if I could ask for your perspective from a client perspective.
Yeah, sure. It is really important to be able to communicate to all stakeholders, colleagues and everybody. You've got to be transparent. We talked about greenwashing earlier on, about the activities that you're doing. For us at the Savoy, that's why we brought in the independent third-party verifications and certifications, bringing a bit of credibility and trust to our claims. So we have the Green Key certification, which is quite a popular one, a set of criteria assessed independently by an inspector on your property for the day, looking through all the paperwork and documentation and touring the property to vet. But also Future Plus certification, which is a sustainability measuring, monitoring, reporting platform, which is helping us to support our BREEAM application. Rigorous criteria again, independently assessed, but it's also about future ambitions and goal setting with Future Plus. So we hope that by communicating that we have those two certifications, of course, probably the general public aren't aware, but at least if they were that interested, they could look to see that our claims have been independently assessed, and we're actually being audited by PricewaterhouseCoopers as well at the end of the year. So we've got to be very careful, but also spreading the word regularly. Social media platforms is a great way to get the word across about the good things that we're doing. We are a luxury property. We don't compromise that luxury. So we have to work very, very hard to have that seamless experience for our guests. Website, newsletters, all of the above. And storytelling, really important. Works brilliantly when you come to the dining experiences. You've got the provenance against the menu or the dishes, which is wonderful, working with the farmers, producers. And then just having the opportunity to lean in with the guest who might be trying to decide what they want to eat for the day, and just expressing where their food has been fished or caught, or the animal husbandry of the item. So lots of different ways that we try and engage and communicate with our stakeholders.
Antje, do you have any perspective on how the Peninsula is handling that important facet?
Yeah, I think from a sort of communication, especially when it comes to guests, I think we can hold our hands up and say that that's not something we do particularly well, or that we like to do in the first place. There's a real sort of desire here to do all the right things, and it's just taken care of, and nobody has to worry about it if you stay with us. It has its advantages, but also it obviously means if you don't know, or if you don't have an interest, you would never find out unless you actually ask specific questions. I think the bigger demand for this sort of information generally comes from other businesses, funnily enough, rather than from individual guests. I think there is, we touched on this earlier, the sort of this myth of the ethical consumer, where people sort of say that ethical decisions are really high up on their agenda, but actually when it comes to the actual purchasing decision, that's not really proven to be true in any area, not just hospitality, by the way. But so when corporates who have to start reporting on their CO2e footprint across the board, all three scopes, obviously want to know what it means having an event here with us, in terms of the meeting room space, staying overnight, eating, dining, taking a car. Do we have those numbers? And the answer is yes, we do. And they're also, audited, so they are, they're sort of bulletproof numbers, so to speak. So we have everything here, should anyone ever ask, but it's not really something that we ever go out and sort of platform in that shape or form. I think we do use it as a tool, more or less, to connect to our stakeholders. So whether that's Westminster City Council, other hotels, the Royal Parks, those kind of organizations, as well as really other companies also in the luxury field, not necessarily just hospitality. I've had some really good conversations with the sustainability lead at Chanel recently, who, we have sort of, we're not in the same industry, but we're kind of in the same industry, if you know what I mean. So we have some sort of joint challenges on, the communication side, but also some themes really that we can share in terms of modern slavery and your supply chain, etc., etc. So I think our communication very firmly at this moment in time sits with on a B2B level.
Fantastic.
I was just going to jump in. We do post-stay surveys for our guests who have stayed with us, and we have introduced the question in there. There are a few questions about we're asking them how satisfied they were with their experience, and we have introduced the question around sustainability initiatives. And we are seeing some guests say, "I don't care. I couldn't care less," unfortunately, but others have noticed one or two little things that we're doing around, and it's great to see. So it's a small % of guests who are providing that feedback, but you know what, 1% is good enough for me. It's the right thing to do, and I agree with Antje. From a corporate business level, where they're coming to have meetings here or conferences or big events, they have always been interested in understanding where we sit with our initiatives. But the general public, maybe they just assume that we're doing the right thing. But it's always good to just test the water and make sure that we're not missing anything along the way. So I guess have a chance to share their feedback on sustainability.
I think that's an important point. I mean, to the people that it matters most to, it matters a lot. So there's a cross section of consumers, and especially a lot of the people probably on this call, who this is, going to be one of their key deciders. Matt, I wanted to frame this question up to you. The communication side, how do you frame this with your suppliers? How are you getting this information to the people that are providing you product?
Yeah, I think in terms of the supplier side of things, there is two aspects. I think the first one, as Debra mentioned, was for us as an hotel to assess where we are with our sustainability goals. So 2 years ago, we've decided to partner with Green Globe and pass all the certifications. So all the hotel from the group are Green Globe certified, and that gives us a good start, to be able to understand where we are and where we want to go. And from there, we can start communicating with our supplier. So we then, have a very straightforward conversation explaining where we are, but also what we want from them. So I think it's a bit of a reverse communication when now I will be the one pushing towards my supplier and say, okay, this is what we want you to do, or maybe looked at having electric vehicle, or maybe delivering your food on recycled boxes, or a reusable container. So I think in terms of like the communication side of things, we are communicating pretty straightforward with our supplier, but it's also us asking them, to give us that information on like, what are you doing? What can we put on our menu? Where's that meat coming from? Is it sustainably sourced? That cotton that we use for, bed linen. There's a lot to do where the energy is coming from. So yeah, I think for in terms of the supplier side of things, it's a bit reverse when we are the one asking, to communicate to us.
That's great. Thank you very much. So that's kind of the close of the main portion of the conversation, where we're kind of talking about sustainability in the hospitality industry, specifically in the luxury space. The last question I want to ask is more for our audience. We have a lot of people who are in attendance today that are students or potential students, who are curious about how they might be able to find a way forward in a sustainable job in the hospitality and luxury hospitality industry. What is the perspective of the panel? Do you have any thoughts on how a student could best position themselves to find a positive way forward with a career in this industry?
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because I certainly didn't start off as a director of quality and sustainability. I joined the Savoy as assistant to the general manager for many years. Learned about the operations. Got a real in-depth knowledge over the years of how all the operational departments link and work. And then in 2005, when the hotel became a Fairmont property, I was literally sent a book on how to green your hotel. And that sparked my interest and started very slowly from there. But for many years, what I was doing just wasn't recognized by the senior management team at all. They just weren't interested in sustainable initiatives. And then I think my managing director went to a conference and was asked about what we were doing at the hotel, and he actually couldn't answer the question. He came back and he said, Debra, I'm interested, I'm listening. Go and educate yourself, take the lead and drive it forwards. And now here I am as a director of quality and sustainability. So I think for those listening, literally, if you want to work in hospitality, get in, understand the day-to-day, work around all the different operations, understand how they all link. And in every department, sustainability touches every department, whether you're in talent and culture, whether you're in procurement, whether you're in maintenance, whether you're at the front desk or in housekeeping, multiple opportunities to understand how you can embed sustainable thought processes into the operation. So a lot of opportunity, but get prepared to work in the industry and then work out where you want to sit. But, you know, I am seeing, and Matthew said that he's also taken on the role. And sometimes I see PAs taking on the role, but it is a very broad topic, as James mentioned earlier. It's getting harder and harder and harder for a single person to manage this by themselves. You need a team, you need a solid understanding of how you can touch the different departments. But it's a wonderful opportunity for anybody listening. Because it's ever growing. My goodness, all those years ago when I started, did I ever imagine that this subject would be as broad as it is? So lots of opportunities to go in any direction. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Debra. Any other thoughts on that? I know that kind of all of us kind of had come to this from a more operations-based path. So any other thoughts on, you know, for the listeners?
I was just actually going to build on Deborah's point there. I think more broadly, like the demand for green skills has never been higher, I think, across industries. So there's never been a better time to be interested in sustainability. And as we've kind of touched on, it intersects with so many facets of the discipline that no matter what your interest is, there'll be ways for it to show up. I think when it comes to positioning yourself, and this has kind of been alluded to, not every business had a dedicated sustainability role. Even today, not every business does across luxury industries, whether it's hospitality or further afield. So I think if you are interested and proactive and passionate and put your hand up, no matter what your role, there's invariably going to be opportunities to get involved because businesses have to be seen to be doing something. And to Deborah's point, no matter what your role, there is probably an opportunity to help a business impact positively its sustainability plans, regardless of the function, if you're just kind of willing to muck in and get involved really.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that. I think the good news for everybody, hopefully, is that every job is a sustainability job these days. I don't think it's a single discipline in any shape or form. You really need to understand what's going on in a hotel or in a restaurant or in hospitality generally. You need to know what's what, how an organization is set up, where are the levers you can pull. Is it a pull or is it a push that you need to perform in order to get to where you need to be? And you know, I think whatever role you take up, the important part is to really educate yourself. I think that's something I would really like to emphasize because it's just an ever-moving feat at this moment in time. So whether that's a formal education or whether that's knowing your sources and knowing you know, where you get your information from, I think that's really important. And also connect with like-minded people. I think it's a really wonderful tool to be able to reach out to someone and say, hey, how are you doing this at your property or in your industry? Because you learn huge amounts.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so much for all of those valuable answers, and thank you for the great conversation that we've had today. I'd like to take a moment now to open up questions to the floor. So if you're watching virtually, please feel free to pop a question that you may have in the chat. If you're watching via the live stream webinar at Regent's University, please make a call out to the person in the room and they can add it to the group chat, and we'll take a moment to see if there are any questions from the audience. Whilst we're waiting to see if any questions pop in, we discussed this when we were preparing for this, but we didn't make it to it on the call today. One of the things that we had discussed in the preparation for the call was how you display sustainable practice to a guest in the luxury space. You can't really have the multiple recycling bins and things like that in the room. Is there any perspective you can provide on that approach of the kind of making sustainability visible or not visible to guests because we're practicing specifically in the luxury space?
I think it's easier from the dining perspective, or perhaps even with the bars, because we all understand that we want to eat healthily. We want to know where our food has come from. I think at the Savoy, we don't have recycling bins in the room. We don't expect our guests paying that kind of rate to be doing their own recycling of their waste in the room. It's sort of done behind the scenes a little bit with Antje, but we have an on-site table bottling plant, filtration plant. So the guests will see that we're reducing our plastic, for example. We have eliminated all single-use plastic at the hotel. So that's one step that the guests might notice, that the water's delivered to their room in glass bottles with a little message on there about our carbon footprint. So maybe that's just one way. But yeah, we can't compromise the luxurious experience. And that actually over the years has been very difficult to achieve, because as I said earlier on in the conversation, is pushing the suppliers and producers to give us a product that met our expectations before we would put that in front of our guests, has helped to drive the change from both directions.
That's really interesting. Can I add one thought to this? I think for me, the interesting sort of evolution over the years really has been how the sort of the values really of sustainability and luxury have begun to sort of align almost. I think if you'd said to someone, a while ago that I have a sustainable handbag or something, you probably wouldn't have had something of high quality or very fashionable in mind. But now the sort of, the focus on craftsmanship, skills, longevity, durability, all those are sort of, true for sustainable products, but often also for luxury products. And I think that's a really interesting sort of recent development where the sort of the scratchy wool jumper is no longer the only sustainable option out there. You can have something really nice and sustainable, and I think that's the sort of the little golden bit in the middle where everybody's trying to meet. And I think that's what Debra also means with the creating a luxurious experience without a compromise, but a compromise to anyone, not to the guest, but also not to the environment or the employees or the communities.
Mm.
That's great. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. The first one I'm going to ask is from the virtual panel, or from the folks listening virtually. This is from Catherine, and it is there a specific sustainability effort that has been the most successful with guests or gotten a significant amount of positive feedback?
I think in terms of feedback, as I said earlier, because we don't specifically communicate something as a sustainability effort, it's perhaps more difficult to measure. But I can speak to things like we have a program across all Peninsula properties called Naturally Peninsula, which is plant-based dishes that are highlighted on a menu. It doesn't say vegan or whatever else. It's called Naturally Peninsula, which has always been sort of much loved by many guests, because whichever Peninsula hotel you go to, it'll be there as your sort of hallmark of something that is hopefully good for you and very tasty, including afternoon teas, etc., etc. And the other part here in London in particular that we've had positive feedback on, that is again not declared as a particularly sustainable thing, but we have a the sort of fleet here in Peninsula hotels is really important to have a number of really nice big cars that drive guests around, which is obviously flies in the face of anyone that wants to talk about perhaps public transport or other means of transportation, including myself. I'm a keen cyclist, but we have sort of found ways of making some of our cars, including this vintage taxi, into an electric vehicle. So it's been, it went to a workshop somewhere in the Surrey Hills and was worked on and converted into something that is actually now again fit for purpose. And for a guest, it's just a very beautiful car to be driven around in, and a sort of a vintage car at that. But you wouldn't necessarily know that the reason it's allowed to drive is, no more diesel, but it now has actually got an electric motor, so to speak. So there are things that we do that we get feedback on that guests really love, but they might not love it because it's sustainable. It's regardless of that, if that makes sense.
I was just thinking, actually, in terms of feedback, when we were talking about guests wanting authentic experiences, our concierge team are really good at guiding our guests to go and visit areas that are less well known, guiding our guests to sustainable retail shops, for example, where maybe leather isn't used, or to restaurants where to restaurants that are specifically geared towards vegan or vegetarian, or maybe the artisans, the cheese specialist. So from feedback from guests, they really like something a little bit different, aside from the Tower of London, the Wheel, all those Buckingham Palace, all those standard, to actually discover the unsung parts of London that are supporting the smaller businesses who are doing really wonderful things in the background.
That's a great point, and it's something
Treading lightly on areas that are well less trodden, if that's the right phrase to use.
Well, that actually leads in really well to the next question that I see in the chat. This came from the webinar streaming room at Regent, and this is talking about training. So do you have any specific sustainability training or engagement programs for your employees? So obviously, if you have your Bell staff trained to give that type of direction, what type of training programs do you all have to make sure that this type of programming is successful?
Well, certainly at the Savoy, we have something called School for Change. It's an online library of multiple courses of different lengths, different interests. And we have a requirement for all our colleagues to go onto the School of Change and actually complete at least one of those courses. There are courses specifically for facilities management or for IT or for procurement and sales and marketing. There are a whole range around climate change interests or impacts in the world. So we design our contracts around a small part around making sure that our colleagues understand what's expected when they come to the Savoy on sustainability, raising awareness. And during orientation, it's mentioned again, and then in the department. So the education or the awareness is ongoing, but purely from educational, all our colleagues can go on at any time and just educate themselves on any different aspects that they're interested in, and then they get a certificate at the end of it.
That's great. Any other programs at the other properties that you guys would like to call out?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's the same. So we have a mandatory sustainability piece on our induction program. So as soon as you join the hotel, you will be talked through sustainability. And then we also have an online platform called Flow. And then people have to log in, and there is mandatory piece there that they have to do. And then we also have a 1 year mandatory training specifically on sustainability. This is all part of the Green Globe certification, and it has to be done. So we are following up on this year.
And if I can, I was just going to jump in and offer like a different perspective on training, which is why it's so important in the context of sustainability, because I think from the businesses that we work with, so much of the action that's needed is around behavior change. You need people across the business, across the workforce to kind of buy in to what you're trying to do as a business. And so whilst the training is a good chance to kind of remind people of expectations and kind of a bit of storytelling almost, I think it's really important to ensure that those behaviors are kind of reinforced. And, you could have the most incredible bit of sustainable technology in a hotel or a restaurant, but if no one's using it properly, you're undermining all the good work that's gone in to begin with. So I think it's, part of that behavior change. And I think also as well, authenticity has been mentioned a few times already on the webinar. I think it's so important that when sustainability does show up for kind of guests and consumers and customers, it feels authentic to the brand they're experiencing. And I think that's really powerful means for training to not just communicate what we're doing, but kind of why we're doing it and how it's distinct or authentic for us as a business.
That's great. Thank you so much. Time for one last question. A lot of you have talked about the sustainability aspect with working with partners and driving partners for change and driving other businesses that you're working with to have more sustainable practices so that they can, provide their offering at your business. Have you ever had any pushback from that? Are there any supplier or any times where you've had challenges because, a brand wasn't interested necessarily in meeting your requirements?
Certainly from the packaging perspective, I can remember when we were requesting that our suppliers, our fish suppliers, our meat suppliers, our vegetable suppliers, we were asking them to use reusable crates to take them back, wash them and replace them because we didn't want the polystyrene, we didn't want the cardboard. That wasn't an easy win because, of course, they had to invest in their side in order to remain as being a supplier for us. Also, now we expect our suppliers to go through something called an EcoVadis audit so that they are also being audited against their claims. There's an investment requirement there from their side. So there's not so much pushback now, but certainly in the early days of transitioning, there was quite a bit of resistance. But ultimately, we have the Savoy name, so that helped a lot. I'm not saying that didn't help. You want to be a supplier to the Savoy Hotel. These are our expectations that you have to meet to remain on our preferred supplier list.
I think it's a very good point, and I think I would echo the sort of thought of sometimes I can come across as pushback, but I think everybody's in the sort of same boat of trying to figure this out as they go along. And you know, in many ways, we have to almost create our own demand here for certain products or packagings or logistics that might not yet be in place because it just nobody's asked the question before. And I think particularly in the sort of the high end of the market, perhaps you really have a lot more pulling power to kind of say, well, but can we try, or should we, you know, do it like this, or maybe I ask someone else. And I think 9 out of 10 times you'll find that people actually do want to give it a go, but it's just not something that's been requested before or that they had to consider or whatever it is. So I think it's a great, if someone does push back, I always say there's a great opportunity to try and overcome that challenge. I think that's the way to look at it. And sometimes, you know, you are literally inventing the wheel right in front of your eyes, that others can then join on and, you know, solving whatever challenge they might be throwing at you.
Yeah, I mean, same. I would totally agree with everything you've just said, Antje and Debra. And also there is that aspect of like now being purchasing director for Hotel Café Royal and my previous job at the Sofitel, when you have two different hotels, you know, with maybe not the same history or the same weight. And when you talk to suppliers sometimes, you know, I remember 10, 12 years ago trying to source eco-sustainable straw or sustainable corn starch and as an alternative to plastic was extremely expensive and very rare. So it's either you go for a straw which is £2 a piece or you don't do it, you know. And then again, trying to have your supplier on board with those kind of projects, there is sometimes a huge investment on their end. So I also think it depends who is talking to them, what kind of property is talking to them, and if they really, really want to be, you know, part of that journey. Same thing, you know, we're talking now with a lot of supplier about electric vehicle, and there is that ULEZ charge now, which is in place in London. But there is a huge cost on investment, you know, on having a eco vehicle or an electric fleet. So it's again work in progress and, you know, baby steps. So yeah, maybe we go for the recycle the crate, you know, so they can deliver in the same container over and over. But yeah, it is sometimes challenging, and you do have some discussion around it.
That's great. Thank you all. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. I'd really like to thank everyone for attending today, and I'd especially like to thank my panel for coming and having this great discussion. I think this is a great opportunity to help, you know, potential students and students learn about what's kind of going on with hospitality in the luxury industry, as well as specifically the luxury hospitality industry. This conversation took place as part of the ramping up to the induction of the new luxury hospitality management program at Regent's University London. We're very privileged to be able to partner with the Hotel Café Royal, the Peninsula, and the Savoy as our training partners for this program. So students in this program will be working at these properties as part of their studies. So we're incredibly privileged to be working with such an illustrious group of folks and illustrious group of hotels. We'd also like to thank James for coming in for that broader luxury perspective. We'll also be working and partnering with a lot of luxury companies, a lot of luxury brands as this program rolls out. So I'd like to thank you again all for coming today. Thank you so much for providing some great perspective, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
all.
lovely day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.